Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 13 wide receiver rankings for the 2020 fantasy football season. On today's episode, of course, we're going to be talking about all things related to the wide receiver position, starting off with matchups at the position. We'll talk about which defenses are giving up the most points to opposing wide receivers thus far this season on average in a half PPR scoring format. After that, we'll talk about my top 36 rankings on a half PPR basis. Again, meeting everyone in the middle for those of you who play standard. For those of you who play full PPR, we meet in the middle. Again, rankings are always going to be subject to change as the week progresses. Just like yesterday, right? I didn't have Jonathan Taylor involved in the top 36 running back video because, again, he tested positive last week and there was a potential he could have potentially missed. Now he's been activated, and where do we slot him in? Again, rankings are always going to, be subject to change as the week progresses. One of two ways to go ahead and stay up to date with that. You can either join the Patreon, link down in the description, where you can get all of the rankings, flex rankings, every single positional ranking, including defenses and kickers on a weekly basis, all of your 2020 fantasy football questions answered. And of course, you could also come by Sunday mornings, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, kick off with Kirchhoff, live streaming. We'll have updated top 36 wide receiver rankings, running back, all that kind of jazz there, answering questions for the entire morning, getting you guys ready for kickoff. Again, as of right now, the Baltimore versus Steelers game is currently going down. I've already seen two quarterbacks throw interceptions. I think it's midway through the first. I had to go ahead and stop watching that in order to go ahead and record this again. So I'm not 100% certain as to the performances of a Diontae Johnson or Claypool, but we will still mention them based on their matchup this upcoming week in Week 13. So keep that in mind. Also keep in mind that the Buccaneers and the Panthers will be on bye. So there are 6 valuable wide receivers in those two organizations alone that are not going to be included in this top 36 list. So we are going to be going after a couple other guys that are probably not as appealing, but still potentially have a pretty good matchup this upcoming week, okay? Before we begin, again, if you guys could, subscribe to the channel. We are on our way to 36,000 subscribers. I cannot thank you guys enough for helping us get to 35K. We are on our way to the next goal. Again, clicking the like button down below, sharing, and commenting down below really does help boost the channel and continue its growth. So I really do appreciate you guys continuing to do that. And for those of you who went over to the Fantasy Pros channel in the video that I collabed with them on and commented down below and liked that video, really do appreciate you guys spreading the love and my name out in the community. Appreciate it. All right, let's get into this, shall we? Let's start talking about matchups at the wide receiver position, beginning off, of course, with the Seattle Seahawks giving up a lot of points. They didn't give up a lot of points to the Philadelphia Eagles this past week. Travis Fulgham, Jalen Reagor, disappointments to say the very least, but the tight end position continued to succeed. And now that Zach Ertz is coming off, maybe, that offense is going to figure itself out, but the tight end position is mainly their thing. Couldn't take advantage of the Seattle matchup. This upcoming week, they have, of course, a matchup against the New York Giants. I don't know if Daniel Jones could take care of the Seattle Seahawks secondary. I mean, to be honest, Daniel Jones is still dealing with an injury. His hamstring's a little beat up. They might have Colt McCoy at quarterback, and with that, it just seems like nobody's really going to have an incredible game like they should based on the matchup. So again, something to keep an eye on, but nothing too exciting this week based on it. The Dallas Cowboys, of course, they will have a matchup against the Baltimore Ravens. The wide receivers of the Baltimore Ravens get very utilization thus far this season, so we skip that. Moving on to the Atlanta Falcons. I think the Falcons, of course, they're a secondary that you want to throw on. Their run-stop defense has been pretty consistent all season long, as we saw last week against the Las Vegas Raiders. But again, Michael Thomas, is he going to get enough targets? Is Emmanuel Sanders going to get a couple targets here and there to give him some value from Taysom Hill? I don't think so. Again, another one of these good matchups that could be lost based on circumstances within each team, injuries, players just not getting opportunity, etc. The Minnesota Vikings will take on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Maybe if, in fact, DJ Chark is back, that'll be great. Nelson Agholor and Henry Ruggs will play against the New York Jets. This is probably the best matchup they'll have in a while, and maybe even rest of season. So hopefully they could take advantage of that and help you guys out. Again, the Jets giving up 202 receiving yards and at least 1 touchdown to opposing wide receivers thus far this season. The Tennessee Titans, Arizona Cardinals, Jacksonville Jaguars, Cincinnati Bengals, and the Cleveland Browns close out the top 10. We'll talk about players going up against these matchups as we talk about the top 36 rankings, but just to kind of give you some perspective as to how many yards, touchdowns per week on average they give up to opposing wide receivers. We covered that. I want to also talk about some of the tougher matchups. The Los Angeles Rams are giving up the fewest points to opposing wide receivers thus far this season. They'll have to take on the Arizona Cardinals, Kyler Murray, who's been struggling as of late, and of course, DeAndre Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins and Jalen Ramsey have a pretty storied history, considering they both played in the same division before. The Jacksonville Jaguars playing against the Houston Texans twice a year, every year. So again, they have some history. They know each other. They know how to play against one another. We'll just see how, who ends up on top in this upcoming week's matchup. The Washington football team will take on Pittsburgh. It's going to be hard to stop all three of their stud wide receivers. The Chicago Bears, their secondary has been getting worse and worse as the weeks have progressed. Their defense is losing hope as the offense cannot keep them in games, of course. And also, the Chicago Bears don't really have a pass rush, so their secondary has really kind of fallen apart because, again, there's no pressure. They couldn't even touch Aaron Rodgers the other night. And if you're not going to be able to at least sack him even with coverage, it's going to be tough to get after Matthew Stafford if, in fact, Kenny Galladay comes back. Kansas City Chiefs stopping opposing wide receivers. Of course, if Drew Lock is going to be the starter this week, he could end up putting together performance late in the game, but he hasn't really produced well in his 2 contests against Kansas City thus far in his career. But either way, these are some of the performances and or matchups this upcoming week that we have to keep an eye on as it pertains to the wide receiver position. Now that we've covered that and given you guys some perspective there, we can go ahead and move on and start talking about my top 36 wide receiver rankings on the week. All right, here we go. Number 1, even though you are all anticipating Tyreek Hill to be at number 1, I cannot do it because I think Davante Adams truly should be the number 1 wide receiver this week. He plays against the Philadelphia Eagles secondary. And though many people may be thinking, okay, well, Tyreek Hill's coming off a 50-point game and a half PPR and a 60-point game and a full PPR. It's an interesting choice, Andrew. I'll tell you why. DeVante Parker is coming off of consecutive games of just scoring touchdowns, similar to a Tyreek Hill. But the thing that it separates him, in my opinion, this week is matchup. This upcoming week, playing against the Philadelphia Eagles. Last year, he played against the Philadelphia Eagles in week 4 prior to getting hurt in the 4th quarter and missing an entire quarter of that game. He had 15 targets, 10 receptions, and 180 yards. Okay, he had turf toe, missed the 4th quarter. So in 3 quarters, pretty much was doing work against that defense, 60 yards and at least 3 receptions per quarter. Okay, pretty good. But now you may be thinking, okay, but that Philadelphia defense last year didn't have Darius Slay. Okay, let's see what exactly a guy like Davante Adams has done to Darius Slay as of his recent career. In 2019 against Darius Slay, 7 catches, 93 yards and a touchdown. In 2018 against Darius Slay, 9 catches, 140 yards and a touchdown. Put up some pretty good numbers against them. DK Metcalf just this past week had 10 catches for 177, and he dropped a touchdown catch against the Philadelphia Eagles. Could have had 200 and a touchdown. I think Davante Adams, as long as he continues to get his opportunity, which he definitely is, and the red zone looks, he's going to be a monster, and that is why I have him as my number 1 this week. Moving on to our number 2, of course, it has to be Tyreek Hill. We just mentioned him, coming off of a game with 13 catches, 269 receiving yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns. It looks really similar to the Tyler Lockett game earlier this season, which was 15 catches, 200 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Very similar numbers, but either way, this easily won many people their weeks. They play against the Denver Broncos. Tyreek Hill has been absolutely insane this year. He's the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy as it currently stands. I don't think it's possible for him to have another 50-point game as we all anticipate, but if he ends up dropping 20, then that's what we're kind of anticipating. He does it pretty much every single week. The last time he played against Denver, 6 catches, 55 yards and a touchdown. He's always getting safety based on the ability to score touchdowns on a weekly basis. His baseline floor is easily 15 points. Anything above that is just gravy that he'll consistently get based on the ability to catch 1 pass for 75 yards at a touchdown like he always does. So either way, Tyreek Hill, my number 2, guy that you're always starting going forward. All right, we have A.J. Brown as our number 3. So here's the thing. A.J. Brown last week had a tough matchup, played against the Indianapolis Colts. The first time he played against Indianapolis this year, week 10, had 4 targets, 1 catch, didn't do anything in that contest. But this last week, it was a different Tennessee team. They came out and they really imposed their will, and they took charge of the AFC South. They really did. Of course, with Derrick Henry running the ball consistently, A.J. Brown was able to open himself up a little bit more. 4 catches, 98 yards, and a receiving touchdown, and even had a kickoff return for a touchdown on an onside kick. So he ended up putting up a pretty good 23.8-point performance. This upcoming week takes on Cleveland, the 10th easiest matchup at the wide receiver position in terms of points given up. Just a couple of the things that I wanted to mention. Greedy Williams, the cornerback, is going to be out. Ronnie Harrison, the safety, is going to be out. Both of these guys going to be missing significant time in this secondary. A secondary that has already been beat up all season long based on injury. They're going to be missing another 2 guys. This just opens up more for the Tennessee Titans passing attack. In terms of wide receivers against the Cleveland Browns, as of Colin Johnson. Yeah, exactly. Who's Colin Johnson? On the Jacksonville Jaguars. 4 catches, 96 yards, and a touchdown. Tyler Boyd, 11 catches, 101 and a touchdown. T. Higgins in the same game, 5 catches, 71 yards, and a touchdown. And then James Washington, 4 catches, 68, and a touchdown. These are just performances in just the last couple weeks that have been dropped on this defense. As they lose pieces, it is going to be harder for them to stop studs like A.J. Brown. Should be a great play this upcoming week. Going forward, we have DK Metcalf as our number 4. Of course, he's coming off 10 catches, 177 yards. I mentioned it before, and I mentioned it multiple times this week. If he had caught that touchdown, my goodness, he would have launched himself into a different conversation, 30-point monster again, and really takes over. But either way, not even too worried about it. He really just buried Darius Slay, though. I'll be honest. This upcoming week, he has a tough matchup. Even though we talk about players like Ramsey and Stephon Gilmore, Bradbury for the New York Giants, formerly of the Panthers, is a tough player to go up against. It really is, and I think even though this is a tougher matchup, quote unquote, I've still seen a lot of wide receivers produce against them this year. Terry McLaurin recently, 7 catches, 115 and a touchdown. Mike Evans, 5 catches, 55 and a touchdown. T. Higgins, 5 catches, 44 and a touchdown. These are number 1 wide receivers playing on the outside, covered by Bradbury, and have had themselves some at least moderate amount of targets that lead to their eventual success. So as long as DK Metcalf is seeing himself his usual amount of targets and he's not disappearing in this contest like he has earlier this season multiple times where he only gets 5 or 6 targets, as long as he's getting upwards of 9 to 10, I'm perfectly confident with him this week. We're starting him regardless. He's a stud, number 4. We move on to our number 5, Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen, 10 targets, 4 catches, 40 yards, touchdown. Ended up having a great 14-point week, even though it could have been better. This upcoming week, they take on the New England Patriots. That secondary is tough, whether it's Devin McCourty and or Stephon Gilmore. It is going to be a tough task at hand for Justin Herbert. Bill Belichick is going to throw everything at this rookie quarterback. I don't think Bill Belichick often loses to rookie quarterbacks in general. I don't know what his record is. I think it's a pretty impeccable one from what I remember and just hearing the stats out loud. But either way, I think Justin Herbert's going to be up against it. He's going to have to be able to diversify and kind of spread the ball out a little bit. But either way, Keenan Allen, pretty much besides Austin Eckler as of late, has been the main guy that is getting all the targets and is getting the bulk in the majority going in his direction. So regardless of the matchup, I still think that Keenan Allen is very capable of scoring against the secondary. Last time he played against New England was in a playoff matchup. He did end up scoring in that game, but only had 2 catches for 57 and a touchdown with Phillip Rivers. So again, it is a little bit of a different team, a little bit of a different approach. As of right now, I still think Keenan Allen has a very valuable, streamline of targets, and in that alone, he still has value regardless of matchup. So he's my number 5. We have number 6, Adam Thielen. Hopefully is coming off of the COVID list this week. And if in fact that is the case, he is one of the best matchups to the wide receiver position. The Jacksonville Jaguars are giving up the 8th most points to opposing wide receivers. I mean, just talking about what Jarvis Landry just did to them. 8 catches on 11 targets, 143 and a touchdown. Diontae Johnson a couple weeks prior, 12 catches, 111. And then Chase Claypool in the same game, 4 catches, 58 and a touchdown. Will Fuller, 9 catches, 158 and 2 touchdowns. Keenan Allen, 10 for 125. Brandin Cooks, in the two contests that Brandin Cooks played against them, 11 catches, 244, 2 touchdowns. Again, these are some disgusting stats. People have put up unbelievable numbers just recently against the Jacksonville Jaguars. So not going to be surprised if and when Adam Thielen torches them. He is a touchdown machine. This offense, I think they're going to slow down the opportunity that Dalvin Cook gets this week. I know they've mentioned multiple times he's beat up. He's kind of run down into the ground. We need to go ahead and opt away from him. It's perfect time because Kirk Cousins has thrown 3 passing touchdowns in 3 out of the last 4 games that he's played. So as long as you continue to feed the ball in Adam Thielen's direction, should have a lot of value. We have DeAndre Hopkins as our number 7. I mean, outside of early this season, he hasn't been this low. He's typically been in that top 4 conversation every week. But the question remains, what is he going to be able to do against Jalen Ramsey and the Los Angeles Rams secondary? He's coming off a week of only 5 catches, 55 yards, and that's back-to-back contests in which he's had disappointing performances. We thought he was an every other week kind of guy, having 100-yard games and the touchdown. Unfortunately, that was not the case, and it kind of looks like Kyler Murray is slowing down in terms of his potential, whether it's through the air, on the ground, and scoring touchdowns in general. This offense is kind of slowing its pace that it set early in the first 8 weeks of this season. So, as it currently stands, versus Jalen Ramsey, what have I gone and kind of dug out as of the last couple of years? Going back to 2017, DeAndre Hopkins versus Jalen Ramsey. In the 2 contests, DeAndre Hopkins put up 7 catches, 55 yards, and a touchdown in one of them, 4 catches, 80 yards, and a touchdown in the other. Going to 2018, 3 catches, 50 yards, and a touchdown in one of them, 12 catches, 147 yards in the other. He has produced very well against Jalen Ramsey in the last 4 contests that he's played. So again, I think all is well for the potential of DeAndre Hopkins. He could end up getting shut down, but if that's the fact, it'll just be a matter of Kyler Murray not being able to support a streamline of targets in his direction. We have Justin Jefferson as our number 8. Now, Justin Jefferson in the last 3 weeks, I mean, I just want to read the total stats that he's had. 18 total catches, 291 receiving yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns in just the last 3 games. Of course, this coming off of a game in which he was the number 1 receiver on this team. Saw a season high of targets, 13, 7 catches, 70 yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. My goodness, was he fantastic. Like we mentioned before, he plays against the Jacksonville Jaguars. I just mentioned Landry and Fuller and Cooks and Allen and Diontae Johnson torching them when I talked about Adam Thielen. So again, this secondary gives up a bunch of points. It seems to me that Justin Jefferson, as the weeks have progressed, is getting more and more targets in his direction. I mean, again, in the last couple weeks alone, he's gotten almost 30 targets. So if 10 targets a week is going in his direction, and the way that Kirk Cousins has been playing, it just seems like he is on the right path to continue to feast on defenses. We move on to DeVante Parker. Now, DeVante Parker is an interesting wide receiver and one that I am very excited about if, in fact, Ryan Fitzpatrick is the starting quarterback. That is the only contingency that I want to go ahead and determine and say without a doubt in my mind. If Ryan Fitzpatrick is the quarterback, this ranking stays as such. If Tua takes over the spot and is healthy and ready to play, DeVante Parker drops significantly. Maybe into the 20s, to be honest, because I don't trust Tua. I trust 100% without a doubt in my mind that Ryan Fitzpatrick will feed the ball in DeVante Parker's direction. Again, just looking at the last 2 games that they played, just this last week, what was it, 11 targets for 8 receptions? I think it was 14 targets. 14 targets, 8 receptions, 119 receiving yards. The game before, 6 catches, 61 yards, and a receiving touchdown. I mean, they're going to get the ball in his direction if Fitzpatrick is the quarterback. But against Cincinnati, it's a fantastic matchup. Last year, with Fitzpatrick under center, I mean, DeVante Parker had a great game. 5 catches, 111 yards, and a receiving touchdown. So the potential is there. I think, of course, it's going to be 100% determined on the quarterback under center. Hopefully it's Fitz this week for those of you who have DeVante Parker. We have Calvin Ridley as our number 10. As of right now, we are still kind of worrying about the fact that maybe Julio doesn't come back. I'm hoping Julio comes back. I think Julio makes Calvin Ridley an even better play going forward. In games in which, of course, Julio leaves midway through, it really does throw a wrench in their entire offensive scheme, and going forward just kind of kills the entire vibes of that offense. So coming off of a pretty good performance, Calvin Ridley, 6 catches on 9 targets, 50 yards and a touchdown. Plays against New Orleans this week, of course. I talk about it every week. I do not like New Orleans secondary. I don't think that they are talented enough to stop the combination of Julio and Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley, when he played against them a couple weeks back, had 5 catches, 90 yards. Of course, with Julio in the lineup, will increase that because he'll be pulling number 1 coverage on the other side of the field, while Calvin Ridley could feast. I think Julio will be back. We'll talk about him in a little bit, but I think Calvin Ridley in the matchup in a higher scoring one, which hopefully the Atlanta Falcons, after obviously kicking in the teeth of the Las Vegas Raiders this last week, has more confidence in their offense, and Dirk Cutter can scheme something together to get them in the right position. We have Robert Woods as our number 11. Okay, so hear me out. Robert Woods is coming off of a game of 12 targets, 7 catches, and 80 yards against the 49ers. Again, that's a pretty decent performance. 12.3 fantasy points and a half PPR scoring format. We'll take that any day of the week from Robert Woods, especially considering he didn't score a touchdown. Had himself an 8-yard rushing attempt. All that is beautiful. But this upcoming week, playing against Arizona. Arizona to Robert Woods is similar to what Arizona to Tyler Lockett has been this season alone. So again, just looking at the past numbers in which Robert Woods has taken on Arizona last season, in the 2 contests that he played against them, in one of them, 18 targets, 13 receptions, 172 receiving yards. In the other, 12 targets, 7 receptions, 67 receiving yards, and a touchdown. He's played against them twice last year against Patrick Peterson. Can't really stop him. I think Robert Woods this upcoming week should be a pretty good play. I mean, just looking at some of the matchups and the receivers that have played against them recently and performed well. Metcalf, 3 catches, 46 yards and a touchdown. Of course, Lockett had 9 catches on 9 targets, had himself a receiving touchdown as well in that game. Diggs had 10 catches, 93 yards and a touchdown. Amari Cooper had 7 catches, 79 yards and a touchdown. So again, Arizona secondary, they are a weaker bunch, and I think Robert Woods will be able to take advantage of it this upcoming week as my number 11. Number 12 is Stefon Diggs. Now, he takes on San Francisco, a matchup that Robert Woods just had to take care of, playing against Richard Sherman. So here's the thing. I'm not afraid of Richard Sherman in terms of coverage for my wide receivers. If I had a less talented wide receiver in comparison to Stefon Diggs, then I'd be worried. But just talking about that defense and how many pieces they lost just this past week, I mean, just go look at the injury report. They're dropping like flies. They got a couple pieces back, but then here comes 2 defensive linemen out for the season, 2 linebackers out, a slot corner gone, a safety gone. I mean, they are just dropping like flies in that defense. And I think, of course, the Buffalo Bills, even though it is going to be a tougher task on hand than usual, considering the division they play in, to play against the 49ers, I still think that Stefon Diggs is the number one on this team. With John Brown on the injured reserve, the running game might not be as viable this upcoming week based on the San Francisco run-stopping defense. It's going to have to be thrown through the air. Gabriel Davis, Cole Beasley, those are great options, but we all know the king of this offense is Stefon Diggs. He should be able to at least route up and at least burn Richard Sherman a couple times this week. I think, of course, just going back and looking at some performances as number one wide receivers have taken on Richard Sherman, just go look at every time Davante Adams takes him on. He dusts him, and I think Stefon Diggs should be able to put something like that up on the board this week. We have Allen Robinson as our number 13. Mitchell Trubisky is confirmed the starting quarterback. I've mentioned it before. In the last 3 games against the Lions, Mitchell Trubisky has thrown 9 passing touchdowns and only 1 interception and thrown for about 800 passing yards. So, again, this is a fantastic matchup. Allen Robinson's coming off of a performance of 8 catches, 74 yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. That's great. Again, the Detroit Lions, their defense, they can't stop anybody. Will Fuller, just this past week, 6 catches, 171 and 2 touchdowns. DJ Moore, 7 catches, 127. McLaurin, 7 catches, 95. I think if, Allen Robinson and Mitchell Trubisky are going to be the 1 and 2 combo, he is going to get more opportunity there. In the last 3 contests, Allen Robinson has had a minimum of 74 receiving yards in each of the last 3 games against Detroit. So again, he's got a safe baseline floor there with the upside of a touchdown. I think number 13 is the perfect spot for him. We move on to Terry McLaurin as number 14. Again, they do play against a tough defense. The Washington football team playing against the Pittsburgh Steelers is nothing that we are too excited about, especially if the running game kind of disappears early. But we've seen it since week 1 when Darius Slayton dropped 2 touchdowns on them. The Pittsburgh Steelers secondary is their biggest weakness, and that is going to be their kryptonite as they get into the playoffs. But as of right now, Terry McLaurin coming off of a game of 7 catches for 92 yards, 12.7 fantasy points in a game in which, of course, Antonio Gibson accounted for all the touchdowns except for the one that Logan Thomas and the defense has scored. But again, Pittsburgh, as of late, T. Higgins, 7 catches, 115 and 1. A.J. Brown, 6 catches, 153 and 1. And CeeDee Lamb, 4 catches, 71 and 1. Wide receivers have been scoring against them as of late, and that has been a consistent thing all season long. I don't have time to talk about all the other matchups that they've gotten touchdowns scored on them. But again, trust me, Terry McLaurin, another fantastic play this week. We have Michael Thomas as our number 15. Again, Michael Thomas is 100% contingent on who's going to be playing quarterback. It's going to be Taysom Hill this week, as per usual, as we anticipate. Even though the Atlanta Falcons give up the 3rd most points to opposing wide receivers this year, it's a matter of what are we going to anticipate and what are we going to see from Michael Thomas. If we get a similar performance to what we saw in week 11, in which Michael Thomas had 12 targets, 9 receptions for 104 receiving yards, then perfect. He's at the perfect spot. In a half PPR scoring format, he can get himself at least 14 to 15 points. Great. We'll take that as our number, 15 wide receiver. But if we're going to see less production, if we're going to see this team run the ball even more, get the ball in, Latavius Murray's hands, of course, and get more utilization out of him, and then, of course, we'll have some goal line carries here and there from Taysom Hill, then the upside of a touchdown is not going to be there for Michael Thomas. And if he's only going to get 6 to 8 targets instead of the 12 to 15 that he should get every single week, it's going to be tough for me to 100% say that he's a must top 12 guy. But I think regardless, if you own Michael Thomas, you're playing him. Based on the matchup, based on who he is, you're playing him. I'm just saying that don't anticipate the upside of the 2 touchdown game or the 15 catch game. That's just not what we can anticipate at this moment in time with the quarterback play. That's all I'm saying. All right, we move on. Diontae Johnson. I don't know how he's doing right now. Again, I last checked in middle of the first quarter. It was pretty much a very interesting game to say the very least. Defense is kind of playing tough in that one. But either way, we know Diontae Johnson. We know his MO. In back-to-back games, he's had 100-plus receiving yards. This season, in the full games that he has played, he's averaging 12.5 targets per game. He's getting incredible opportunity, and the Washington football team as of late have given up pretty good performances to number 1 wide receivers. Amari Cooper, 6 catches, 112 and a touchdown on Thursday night, Thanksgiving Day football. We had Marvin Jones Jr. the week before, 8 catches, 96 and a touchdown. Marvin Hall also scored in that game, and we also had Tyler Boyd for 9 catches, 85 against Washington. So again, there is a very good opportunity if, in fact, Diontae Johnson can go ahead and continue to get the high amount of targets that he is accustomed to, that he should be able to produce. Moving on to our number 17, we have Julio Jones. So as of the report that I read, he had a limited practice today. That is good because, again, he's still dealing with a hamstring injury. I only have him at 17 because, again, if in fact he is on that fringe game time decision and he does decide to play, he is still a liability if in fact he gets injured during the game. I know that the New Orleans matchup is great. Brandon Ayuk had 7 catches, 75 yards and a touchdown against them. Allen Robinson, 6 catches, 87 yards and a touchdown. DJ Moore, 4 catches, 93 and 2 touchdowns. They give up points to number 1 wide receivers. It is a fact. But if Julio Jones is going to be in the lineup and be a problem in terms of maybe he gets injured, re-aggravates the hamstring, and then has to leave, that is something that could easily kill your chances of making the playoffs. So again, we leave him at 17 because there is still the possibility of him getting injured if he's not fully healthy and does not fully practice before Friday. So again, we got to keep an eye on that. But I think, of course, the matchup's great. And we know Julio's a stud, so we don't got to worry about him. Moving on to our number 18, we have ourselves Cooper Kupp. So I mentioned it with Robert Woods. Robert Woods has played well against the Arizona Cardinals in the past. And I think Cooper Kupp has done the same. I mean, late last season, had himself, 6 targets, 4 catches, 40 yards, and a touchdown. If I'm not mistaken, someone could, check that one. But I think he's had pretty good performances against them as of late. But the question remains, how is Arizona against slot wide receivers? Because that is where Cooper Kupp is going to sit, and that is where he's going to produce. I mean, just looking at some of the slot receivers that have really done some damage against Arizona this year. Jamison Crowder, 8 catches, 116-1. Cole Beasley, 11 catches, 109-1, excuse me. Tyler Lockett in the 2 games against them, 24 catches, 267, and 4 touchdowns. So again, they have had some tough, beats against some slot wide receivers. I think Cooper Kupp, again, one of the best in the league at the position. This offense is going to have to throw, if in fact they're going to, keep pace with the Arizona Cardinals offense. I think Cooper Kupp, a fantastic play this week as my number 18. Number 19, speaking of Tyler Lockett and having a lot of points, he didn't have a lot this past week. That's just Tyler Lockett's MO at this point. He's good one week, he's off the other week. And to be honest, that's just kind of where he is, and that's just where he deserves to sit. I think the number 19 spot pretty much encapsulates what his season has been this year. He has been consistent at times, and then he disappears. And that kind of inconsistency and the upside of what he is capable of is so much that, we have to play him. We really do. At the number 19 spot, you got to. And playing against the New York Giants this week, I think there's a chance that Tyler Lockett, even though if in fact maybe DK gets shut down and he has an opportunity to get some more yardage there, my only concern with Tyler Lockett the rest of the season is the return of Chris Carson. Chris Carson not only attributes to getting more targets in his direction, but also touchdowns. And when there's touchdowns going away from guys like Tyler Lockett, I mean, we can go back to earlier this season. There was a reason why Chris Carson didn't have a rushing touchdown until the Miami game. That's like 4 weeks into the season. It's because Tyler Lockett was absorbing majority of those in the early pace of the first half of the season. So again, if in fact Chris Carson's coming back, stealing touchdowns on the goal line, down in the red zone, breaking out runs, it's going to attribute to Tyler Lockett being less viable in that sense, and that is why we have him at 19. But regardless, we know what his upside is. He can score a touchdown on any given play, has the ability to go for 60 yards and a touchdown on one single play, and get himself a pretty good amount of targets if in fact DK starts slowing down. We have Chase Claypool as our 20. So I think the Washington football team is a great secondary. We've seen that. They give up very few points to opposing wide receivers this year. My only concern is, as of right now, if Claypool, I don't know how he's playing against the Baltimore Ravens, if he doesn't get enough targets and given enough opportunity, he becomes really touchdown dependent, just like any other wide receiver. But specifically in his case, he has lived and died off of touchdowns. He has 10 touchdowns in the first 10 games of his career thus far. And if in fact he's not getting more and more opportunities down in the red zone or end zone targets, that is going to be a problem. So as of right now, Washington, though they've given up a couple good performances here and there to Amari Cooper, Marvin Jones, Tyler Boyd, it doesn't mean that every single one of the wide receivers on the Pittsburgh Steelers can produce on a weekly basis and or will find success. So it's going to be a little bit of a struggle, but as of right now, I think Claypool should be a decent play as our number 20. We have number 21, Deebo Samuel, coming off a fantastic week, 11 receptions, 133 yards. Hopefully, this is a guy that you guys are picking up if in fact he's available in your league. I think he was still available in like 55% of leagues. So again, the Buffalo Bills matchup, in my opinion, beautiful for number 1 wide receivers. If Brandin Ayuk comes back, that's fine. It's not going to play a big difference. I think, of course, Brandin Ayuk will take a couple targets here and there, but nothing to take away from the potential of Deebo's value. Just looking at what exactly Tre'Davious White has given up to opposing wide receivers as of late, Tre'Davious White has struggled from what I've seen. I mean, Keenan Allen this last week, 4 catches, 40 yards and a touchdown. DeAndre Hopkins, 7 catches, 127 and a touchdown. DK Metcalf, 7 catches, 108 and a touchdown. AJ Brown, 7 catches, 82 yards and a touchdown. My goodness, 777 on those catches, huh? Either way, I think Deebo Samuel, the number 1 wide receiver and the receiving option on this team, should be able to feast against Buffalo's secondary and have himself a pretty good game as my number 21. We have ourselves Brandin Cooks as our number 22. I want to go ahead and right now thank Will Fuller for getting a lot of my teams to the playoffs. I'll be honest. Will Fuller, your contributions to some of my teams has been incredible. I thank you for your service. Obviously, you're going to be suspended for the rest of the season. But again, thank you for your service. This does help Brandin Cooks going forward. Without Fuller in the lineup, there are more targets available for wide receivers, and with the injuries and the releases that have happened recently, it's Brandin Cooks or Kiki Cutie who are going to step up. And Brandin Cooks is certainly going to be the number 1 wide receiver, as he has been the number 2 as of the last, I would say 6 to 8 weeks, getting more and more targets as the season has progressed. Based on matchups, he's had better performances, but he has the Indianapolis Colts this week. It's a tough one. I've seen A.J. Brown play against him, play well. I've seen other wide receivers completely disappear. It's just a matter of what we're going to see from Deshaun Watson. He's played against his defense twice a year for his entire career, and it's just a matter of whether or not he's going to get more opportunity in the direction of Brandin Cooks, because, again, Brandin Cooks is another one of these wide receivers that if, in fact, you give him a ball 60 yards down the field, he can catch and go for a touchdown with his speed. I think he'll be fine. I mean, he's coming off a week of 5 catches, 85 yards. That is like a minimum performance of what he's been doing as of late in the second half of the season. So, as of right now, pretty confident in his overall productivity. That is why we put him at number 22. We have Jarvis Landry as our number 23. Jarvis Landry had the best performance of his entire season this last week against Jacksonville. 8 catches, 143, and a touchdown. Plays against the Tennessee Titans, giving up the 6th most points to opposing wide receivers this season. Just talking about some performances they've given up. T.Y. Hilton this last week. 4 catches, 81, and a touchdown. Pittman, 7 catches, 101. Diontae Johnson, 9 catches, 80, and 2 touchdowns. Will Fuller, 6, 123, and 1. This defense can't stop anybody. They can't. Whether it's on the ground or through the air, they're going to be taken advantage of. Of course, this should be a higher scoring back and forth matchup if, in fact, both these teams can consistently run the ball, because, again, both of these offenses are predicated on running the ball and in play action. So, again, I think Jarvis Landry should be able to perform pretty well in my eyes against this secondary and play himself into a pretty good spot here. This is hopefully the return of Jarvis Landry, and maybe we can go ahead and ride him out for the rest of this fantasy playoff season. Again, this upcoming week he has the Tennessee Titans, then he has Baltimore. Not too, excited about that one, but the Jets and the Giants late in the season, that's something that I want to keep my eye on. Hopefully he can continue the pace and consistency into those matchups. We have Amari Cooper at number 24. Again, Amari Cooper is still going to be the number 1 wide receiver of this team. It's just a matter of how much upside he has. If he's going to catch a 40-yard bomb for a touchdown every week, then sure, he's got himself in a pretty good spot. 20.2 fantasy points this last week against Washington, 6 catches, 112, and a touchdown. Those are great numbers. Playing against Baltimore is still a nightmare. I don't know how this Pittsburgh game is going, but maybe, in fact, they're locking down the Pittsburgh Steelers wide receivers as of right now on Wednesday afternoon football. But as of the last performance that I've seen against Baltimore, Corey Davis and A.J. Brown combined for 9 catches, 175, and a touchdown. So if, in fact, the quarterback play from Andy Dalton is up to par, Amari Cooper should have himself good enough value to certainly be a start and a guy that can contribute every single week. Moving on to our number 25, we have ourselves Michael Pittman Jr. Again, I mentioned this earlier this week. He has obviously a pretty good matchup this week in Houston. Bradley Roby's out with a suspension, along with Will Fuller. Both those guys have been knocked out of their team due to PEDs. So the question is, what do we anticipate from Michael Pittman? I mean, in the last 4 games, he's had 27 targets. That's almost 7 targets per game. That's a pretty good number. And eventually that kind of opportunity will lead to success, considering the fact that this Indianapolis Colts team wants to run the ball. Houston can't stop the run. They're going to find success there. They're going to hit him with play action, get Michael Pittman, their number 1 receiving option, more and more involved in this offense. I think he should be able to feast in this matchup and continue his success. We have DJ Chark as our number 27. I was pleased to see that Mike Glennon actually has an arm and can actually perform. He actually was able to compete against the Cleveland Browns and put up a pretty good performance, even though Cleveland gave them every shot that they possibly could to win that game. Playing against the Minnesota Vikings, giving up the 4th most points to opposing wide receivers. The question is DJ Chark even healthy? I know he's dealing with a rib injury. If he comes back this week, great. We know that the secondary of Minnesota struggled all season long. Regardless of who plays against them, there could be success there. So, again, I haven't really been given the okay and the thumbs up that DJ Chark is going to go. And in fact, if he does, that's great. And I think if he does, he's a top 36 wide receiver. I leave him at 27 with the potential of moving up in my rankings as the week progresses if he's healthy. But again, the matchup is just way too juicy to give up on. We have Corey Davis as our 27. Like I mentioned earlier, Greedy Williams out. And then what was the other guy's name? Ronnie Harrison. Both of them out. Those are 2 secondary members of the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns, they've given up a lot of points to wide receivers. We'll reiterate what we mentioned with A.J. Brown earlier in the episode. Of course, Colin Johnson, 4 catches, 96 and a touchdown. Tyler Boyd, 11, 101 and a touchdown. T. Higgins in the same game, 5 catches, 71 and a touchdown. Those are performances they've given up just recently. So again, if the Cleveland Browns and their secondary is at an even weaker spot, giving up the 10th most points to opposing wide receivers, Corey Davis has averaged about 10 fantasy points per game and a half PPR since returning from his injury / positive COVID test. As of right now, I think Corey Davis could be a pretty good pickup and play going into this week. We have ourselves Juju Smith-Schuster as our 28. Juju gets the least amount of targets between the 3 wide receivers. If in fact that continues, he's probably going to see a limited amount of targets in this game, but will still have touchdown potential upside. So I still think that Juju has value, but not enough to 100% bang the table and say he is a 100% start in the top 24 conversation. I still think he has relevant value based on the ability to catch the ball upwards of 6-7 times, get himself 60-70 yards, and then maybe accompany that with a touchdown. But again, he has himself a safe floor of about 10 points every single week in my eyes, especially in this kind of a matchup. We have Sterling Shepard as our number 29. Depending on who plays quarterback, I guess it could make an overall difference. But Sterling Shepard, again, like I mentioned earlier this week, has an 82.5% catch rate as of the last, 5 games. Has had 40 targets. He has caught a minimum of 6 catches every single game, and he plays against Seattle. I know that they got Griffin back, their starting cornerback, but I don't know if that's going to be the biggest difference maker, as Griffin is probably going to be on Slayton, and Sterling Shepard runs free and maybe is able to cause havoc in the secondary of Seattle. That's my hopes, and that is why I have him at 29. Tyler Boyd's our number 30. Now, Tyler Boyd, mainly at 30 because the Miami Dolphins, they've been torched by a couple slot corners as of late. I know this past week, Jamison Crowder got 0 utilization, and Jamison Crowder can be dropped off your roster immediately. But I think Tyler Boyd, just looking at some of the performances earlier this season, I mean, we've seen Cooper Kupp and even Jamison Crowder and Cole Beasley play well against this Miami defense. So again, I think Tyler Boyd, if he sits in the slot position, if Brandin Allen can get him the ball on a consistent basis in comparison to last week, I know he had a couple end zone targets, led to a defensive pass interference and gave T. Higgins a touchdown. But I still think that Tyler Boyd is still pulling the eye in a lot of the targets in this offense. We have Nelson Agholor as our number 31. So Agholor is in a very interesting spot as of right now. I like Nelson Agholor a lot. Plays against the Jets, the 5th easiest matchup at the wide receiver position, coming off a week of 6 targets, 5 catches, 54 yards. He is a touchdown guy every other week. If in fact this running attack is a little bit slowed down based on the fact that there are injuries in the backfield, they're going to pass the ball a lot. I think Nelson Agholor this week has himself a pretty good opportunity to catching himself the ball 4 times, 40 yards, touchdown, makes himself up a week out of thin air. But that's typically what his MO has been this season, and that's what I'm going to trust in at 31. Cole Beasley at 32. So my only concern about San Francisco is that every time that they play against Cooper Kupp disappears. I mean, completely thin air gone. But my only thing is, Cole Beasley is used in this offense. Either it's a 10-target week or it's a 3-target week, and it maybe passes a touchdown to Gabriel Davis, right? There's always a possibility that he could disappear in the matchup because of how good they are against slot wide receivers. But I still think that if, in fact, this offense is going to have to pass the ball as much as they do on a weekly basis and the running attack disappears, Cole Beasley is going to be asked to do a lot in comparison to what he's done, especially this last week, only 2 catches on 4 targets. So I think Cole Beasley could be a safe play this week as a PPR option. Moving on to our 33, we have ourselves Marvin Jones Jr. So the Chicago Bears, they give up their fair share of points to wide receivers. I mentioned earlier, their secondary is falling apart. Davante Adams, 6 catches, 61 and a touchdown. Justin Jefferson, 8 catches for 135 in the same game. Adam Thielen, 4 catches, 43 and 2 touchdowns. A.J. Brown, 4 catches, 101 and a touchdown. Those are just the last four main, at least contributing wide receivers that have dominated against that defense. This isn't even mentioning earlier this season that wide receivers have taken advantage of them, like Mike Evans having a pretty good game. So either way, I think Marvin Jones, if Kenny Golladay is out, could be somewhat of a viable option. With Matt Patricia going out, I seriously do think that offenses and defenses, when a coach and a GM is fired, they end up playing harder for the next coach. So hopefully Darrell Bevell can get these guys going and his offense could get at least moving the ball in comparison to what they've done in the past couple weeks. Mike Williams is my number 34. Again, this is a tough matchup against the New England Patriots, but I still think that Mike Williams is pulling enough targets and enough red zone opportunity to be a relevant option in this offense. Of course, there's chances that Keenan Allen and or Hunter Henry could steal a touchdown, or a Guyton or a Tyler Johnson comes out of nowhere and scores a 30, 40, 50-yard touchdown. But I still think that Mike Williams is a huge part of this offense, playing majority of the snaps, getting valuable targets that could lead to a big amount of points. So I think Mike Williams still in line for a pretty good week here. We have CeeDee Lamb as our 35. Again, they're going to have to throw the ball probably the entire time against Baltimore, as Zeke will probably disappear pretty soon in that game. And in that case, CeeDee Lamb should be able to run free and play pretty well against that secondary in Baltimore. We have Jakobi Meyers as our last wide receiver option. The way that I see it, play against the Los Angeles Chargers isn't an automatic successful play because, again, they still have a pretty good secondary despite, a couple injuries here and there and letting a couple players go. Just talking about some of the performances as of late. Taylor Gabriel, 3 catches, 79 and a touchdown. Rashad Perriman, 2 catches, 54 and a touchdown. Jakeem Grant, 4 catches, 43 and a touchdown. Nelson Agholor, 2 catches, 55 and a touchdown. So these are not big name wide receivers, but they're scoring. So again, I still think there's a possibility that if in fact Jakobi Meyers is forgotten about, they're covering Damiere Byrd with Casey Hayward, and Jakobi Meyers can pull in a couple extra targets here and there. He could be a valuable play. Those are my top 36 wide receiver rankings on the week. Thank you everybody for watching. I really do appreciate you guys supporting the channel. If you haven't yet already, subscribe to the channel. Click the like button down below. I really do appreciate you guys. Tomorrow we'll be talking about quarterbacks and tight ends. Enjoy your day. Hopefully this Wednesday afternoon football game went in your direction and helped you win. Until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.